A very warm welcome to this IEA video workshop. This particular workshop is called Painting a Sketch Portrait, and I hope you enjoy it. Before I start the video, I think I really ought to explain to you why painting sketch portraits are important to me in the general context of my work. This is perhaps a typical example of the kind of painting I most enjoy painting these days. I painted many subjects. I enjoy boats, marine subjects, landscapes, in Cornwall particularly. But this is the sort of subject I've settled down on. This is based on 3 or 4 photographs taken in a park in London where people meet regularly to play chess. Looking at this painting as a complete whole, it appears to be very highly finished, almost photographic in detail. But if we have a closer look at the chess players, say the group in the foreground, and particularly the men at the table behind them, and then the figure in the far background, you'll see that they're very simply stated, almost caricatures, and painted with only a few marks of colour. More detail, of course, on the foreground figures, but very simply stated even so. And how does one get to be able to simplify a painting down in that way so as to leave it loose and yet apparently deliver a detailed message? That's where one of the reasons why I'm interested in doing sketch portraits. The whole idea of a sketch portrait is that it should be done from life, from the subject, the person, sitting or standing in front of you, done fairly quickly, no preparatory drawing, simple palette of colours, and the idea, of course, is to capture something of the look of the person, but also, ideally, something of the character of the person, how you react to them and they react to you. And in a sense, it's the fun of that relationship with the subject which makes preparing sketch portraits such a pleasurable activity. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, of course, but when they do work, it's great fun, as this example shows. Okay, without more ado, let's get on with the demonstration. Having said that one should always paint from life, of course, thanks to the pandemic, I couldn't do that for this demonstration. So I've had to go through my photo album and find a picture of my daughter Ruth. And here she is, photographed casually in a cafe in London some years ago. And I'm going to have to work from this photograph for the purpose of the demonstration. I'm going to try my best to pretend that she's actually sitting in front of me and that I am working quickly and doing my usual method for painting. And that's what I'll be showing you. To start with, I'm going to crop that photograph down to a reasonable size to work from, which I can clip onto my easel and work from for the purpose of the demonstration. I've just cropped her down and I've changed the background a bit in Photoshop to make it slightly clearer to see. And now you see I've got the photograph clipped to a board at the side, left-hand side of the easel, so I can see the picture and see the surface on which I'll be working. I always use the same paper for these acrylic sketches. In fact, I use it also for life studies when I go to life groups. This is a special paper, heavyweight grey sugar paper made by Arboreta Papers in Bristol. It's the only place I can find I can get it. I was introduced to it when I went to the Bristol School of Art and Design, and they sold it very cheaply there. It's not very cheap, but it's a wonderful material for painting acrylics, basically because it's mid-toned. And here are the tools I'll be using for this demonstration. You can see 3 brushes, a flat Krilla brush by De La Rowney size 10, and 2 round brushes, a medium size and a small one. Different manufacturers, any synthetic brush will do, which is suitable for acrylics or indeed for oils. Above them is a paper towel, which is self-explanatory, and to the left of that is a white washing up sponge. You can get them in different colours, it doesn't matter, I just find that the white one's possibly slightly easier to use, and you will see how I use these tools in the demonstration. And finally we come to the paints I'm going to use. These are all colours out of the Galleria range by Winsor & Newton. They're not particularly expensive, and you can buy them in these big tubs. And they are in order: titanium white, cadmium red, medium I think, permanent rose, cadmium orange, yellow ochre, cobalt blue and Payne's grey. And those are the colours I'll be using for this demonstration. And we'll get on with it. And now you can see I've laid out those colours in a rather different order on my palette. It's in fact a plastic box lid, and I've covered it with cling film simply because it's easier to throw that away rather than try and clean the lid each time. You can see I've got two sponges there, one rather new one, and I've got two large tubs of water, which I will explain how to use in the demonstration. Now you can see I'm starting to paint using the sponge. I've moistened the sponge to pick up and deliver the paint onto the paper, but I'm not diluting the colours, I'm using them straight from the tubes. And I'm starting off by mixing a mid-tone colour, which I'll use for the original blocking in, the first blocking in. And you'll see how that goes. You'll see I'm not referring closely to the photograph. I'm just using this mid-tone to block in a general head shape and a bit of neck on it. I'm no attempt to copy the photograph. What I'm doing, I'm laying down a colour against which I can judge other colours, and that's the purpose of this blocking in. What I will do at each stage during this video is I will stop at intervals to let you see how far I've gone, and then I will put in a little view of the original photograph in case you want to compare with that before resuming. Now, in case you didn't spot them, I used quite a large number of my colours from the palette for this mid-tone. I used titanium white, cadmium red, permanent rose, a touch of orange, and a little tiny touch of the cobalt blue, which just gives a depth to the colour. Those are the colours used so far. Now, to start developing the shape of the head, very roughly, I'm using a different set of colours from the palette. I'm using the titanium white, plus yellow ochre and a tiny bit of orange. And I'm going to go around the outside of the head to get some sort of shape to it. Now that produces a very small change in the painting, but you can see that I'm starting to get the shape of a head just by outlining her hair. I'll let you have a very quick look at that and a quick look again at Ruth's photograph, and then we'll get on to some more dramatic developments, I hope. Now I need to add some depth to my portrait, and for that purpose I need to fill in some background. And because there's a radical change of colour, I'm washing out the sponge very thoroughly in the water, and mixing up on the palette a combination of yellow ochre, cobalt blue and a little Payne's grey. You'll notice that I'm using the edge of the sponge to draw more accurate lines, and I'm not worrying too much about it. I'm still working quickly. It's moving towards the shape of the head. It's not defining the shape of the head. We'll see how far this goes. The great advantage of the sponge as a painting tool is that I can move from a thin line to a big area of filling in very quickly just by squeezing the sponge and applying it more firmly. Again, a quick look at how far I've got with the portrait. You'll see there's a sense of space now, but very little definition within the face. So we've got to do something about that. I expect you're getting used to the idea of this now, so I will keep these views of the painting and the photograph fairly short from now on. So far I've got the general shape of the head, but no detail, and certainly I've not picked up on the angle at which the head can be seen in the photograph. So I changed to the smaller of the two brushes, again moistening it just to pick up the paint and deliver it to the paper. And I'm using a mixture of cadmium red and cobalt blue to give a warm dark colour. I start off by drawing a line across the head where the eyes might be, and a line down the head to suggest the angle of the nose. All these lines are capable of being adjusted, and as you'll see, I do adjust them as the painting progresses. Then I start to add additional lines, the line of the mouth across the face, the approximate width of it, and then I go back to the eye line and start suggesting where the eyes might be. It's to get a general idea of how the face is constructed. And they're all adjustable because I'm working one shape against another all the time. And now in this stage I start to define the outside of Ruth's face, using the same brush and the same colours. And now, after checking back at the photograph, I feel the need to define the face further using a light colour to define her hairline, really. And I mix up titanium white and yellow ochre using the same small brush, which I've washed out, and put in some hairline. We're getting towards now some more accurate drawing of the face. And the hairline. As always, I would have to stop at this point for a moment or two to stand back to see how the painting is looking. The next stage is to define more accurately Ruth's features, and for that I've mixed up another warm colour of basically red and blue, a darker colour than I've used so far in the face. And I'm starting with the eyelid on the her right hand side, our left, and then following that line, one against the other, down the side of her nose into the area of her mouth, These are all approximate marks. They can be adjusted at any time, as you will see as this painting progresses. Checking back against the photograph regularly, looking twice at the photograph, making one mark. I follow down the line of the nose and I start to define the nostrils, the space between the nose and the mouth, which in fact I get wrong, as you will see, and continue with the same colour, defining the position of the features of Ruth's face. Ruth's left eye goes in, and I start checking again one mark against the other and find, after looking at the space underneath her nose, that I'd put her mouth far too low, so I have to redraw that. Now when I get back to restating the mouth, slightly different position, I'm using Payne's Grey for the first time, mixed with a little cadmium red. Now with this darker colour on the palette, I can start to recheck several of the marks I've made before, judging the width of the face, the position of the chin, position of the eyes, and so on. I've decided to leave the eyes alone at this stage, but to move on to defining the shape of the head by introducing a medium tone into Ruth's hair based on yellow ochre. As you will see, I check against the photograph very regularly. Just as in real life, I'd be looking at the model, probably looking twice at the model and making one mark. That's the sort of proportion one ought to aim for. And so I come to the end of this section of the painting. You'll see that I'm gradually getting an image which looks a bit more like Ruth than it was. But the idea is that I'm not painting a copy of the photograph, I'm painting the experience of looking at her, just as I would if she was sitting in front of me as a model, and I would be looking at her and working on the painting at the same time, checking as I go along as I've been describing. Now you may feel there's not a lot of planning in what stage of the painting I tackle next, but I decided now to change to the larger brush and just suggest where Ruth's dress might be to give a frame to the lower part of the painting. And I do that using a cobalt and red mix, cobalt and rose, and then I sketch in a rough idea of where the dress might be. Then I wash the brush very carefully because I'm going to change colour significantly, and I'm going to mix up a light colour, white with ochre and orange, little touches of orange, to find the light pattern in her face. This is quite a dramatic stage of the painting. And having looked at that colour on the palette, I think it needs warming up, so I'm adding a little bit of permanent rose to that. And having tuned in my eye to that light colour, I am finding it in the photograph and transferring it onto the face. This is almost as a separate exercise from filling in the painting I've made so far. It's just painting that colour as I see it. By the time I reach the chin and I'm thinking of moving on to the neck, I realise I'll need a warmer colour. The light is not as bright there, so I decide to stop at that point. Having stepped back from the portrait to take the still photograph of it, I realise I'm not happy about the angle of the nose, so I decide to correct that. And I check the position of that line by standing directly in front of the painting rather than to one side. Having made some small corrections to the nose, I want to get on with a middle tone colour, and I mix up a warmer colour on my palette for that purpose. As you will see, I try to judge it as best I can by looking at the photograph and at the palette, but I can't get it right until I apply the colour to the painting, when it obviously requires adjustment and I have to make some alterations to it, going darker steadily in this case. As you can see, I've moved back to the larger of the two round brushes, and I'm gradually working through darker colours to get a three-dimensional shape to the head, modifying the colour as I go, checking against the photograph and checking against the painting, checking against the palette, adjustment all the time. Apart from using the larger of the two round brushes, as you will see, I'm moving from place to place rapidly across the face, working quickly and trying to make quick gestural marks so that I do not become bogged down in detail. I feel that by this stage I've got the feeling of the portrait, some representation of Ruth, not detailed at all, but it still has a lot of energy in it, this painting, and it's energy I want to keep. As we'll see later, it's easy to overdo these things and overwork a painting. Moving back to the smaller of my two round brushes, I've reached the point of needing to define the eyes, and that's what I should be doing next with the darker colour. You'll see that I'm continuing to check one space against another as I work into the eyes, also remembering that the eyes are effectively a ball set inside the head. So as important as the eye itself is, so is the shape of the upper lid and the lower lid, and I'll be working on both of those. And with those darker colours on the palette, and I vary them a little bit from time to time, I'll work over the face, touching here and there, adding a little light to the upper lip, until I reach a point which I think is absolutely convincing as a sketch portrait. It captures my experience of being with Ruth, watching her face and representing it as energetically as I can. And I think after about 20 minutes of painting, actual painting time, I think that's absolutely fine for my purposes. And after about 22 minutes, that completes my sketch portrait of my daughter Ruth. I hope you've enjoyed this demonstration.